The original New Testament did not contain the story of the woman caught in adultery. So, for an anti missionary polemicist to use that story and say that the whole New Testament is invalid causes them to fall into logical fallacy. And not only that, but they've even gone to John chapter 8 and verse 51, where Yeshua says, "If you fulfill the words that I tell you to do, that you will not see death." And they'll say something to the tune of, "Whoa, whoa, whoa. Yeshua is saying that you will not die if you do the things that I say. Therefore, all these Christians that are dying, they're disproving Yeshua. They're proving him wrong." But that's not what he meant. He was referring to the second death. And if you have a Hebraic understanding of the scriptures, you know that Daniel chapter 12, verses 1 through 2 says that there are going to be some who rise to everlasting life and others to everlasting scorn and judgment and damnation. And by the way, just from a Hebraic Tanakh perspective, when we talk about everlasting damnation, we're not talking about torturing people forever in hell. In Isaiah chapter 66 and verse 24, we read, "And they will go out," these are the Zadikim, the righteous ones, "and look on the dead bodies of those who rebelled against me. The worms that eat them will not die. The fire that burns them will not be quenched, and they will be loathsome to all mankind." So even though their bodies are dead, they're basically looked down upon in the society because people can visibly see their corpses being consumed. Folks, I can't wait until the temple is restored in Jerusalem and we all get to go bow down and worship Yehovah Elohim. And I know that our Orthodox Jewish brethren understand that this temple will not be set up by a political power. It will be set up by the Messiah himself. And just like I don't want people strawmanning my text, the text that I believe in, I don't want to strawman other people's texts. Just like the anti-Semitic apologists do when they go up to people like Charlie Kirk with these fake Talmudic references and say, "Oh, look, the Jew believes he's superior to the Goy in this way, that way, that way, that way." And sure, there are some Jews who do hold this viewpoint, but the thing is that Goy didn't even turn into an insult or something derogatory until far after the Hebrew scriptures were written. In the Hebrew scriptures, the word Goy isn't an insult, it just means nation. So if you're part of the nation of Israel, you go from a plurality of Babylonian nations to a single Goy Kadosh, a single set apart nation. And so, as somebody who is expected to live out the requirements that were given to the Goy Kadosh, the Torah of Moshe, and of course in the Orthodox world they call him Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses our teacher, we're supposed to not make lies or bear false witness. And, obviously there's a tractate in the Talmud about pedophilia and how do we deal with, young ladies who lost their V card to that, and do they get the same bride price? Do they get the same bridal rights, etc.? And of course, when I've read that tractate, I don't see it as something that promotes pedophilia as a good moral thing, but there's a consequence on the flip side that people don't consider, which is that it potentially encourages pedophilia, because if the pedophiles in the society realize that, oh, we could do this to someone who's under a certain age and their bride rights are not taken away, like they have the same bride rights as somebody who has their V card, then, we can do the act that we're going to do without any real consequences. Now, I don't want to have a medieval Jewish Christian disputation where somebody feels like they're forced to have a debate against me or somebody who has similar beliefs to me. For example, in the medieval times in Europe, we're talking like Barcelona, 1263, all the way up to 1414, Catholics would essentially compel or even force Jews to come to a debate table, and they would want them to believe in the messiahship of Yeshua, and they would want them to question the validity of the Talmud. And the outcomes were sometimes dire because former Jews who converted to the Catholicism would be on the other side of the debate table, and they'd also want forced conversion. Now, if they hypothetically put me on the Christian side of these debates, even though I wouldn't want to conform to the Catholic doctrine, I would challenge the Talmudic belief or even this tradition that comes from Targum Jonathan that Malachi and Ezra are the same person, because scholars of history would completely disagree. Or even this idea in Pirkei Avot that the Council of Mighty Men, in other words, the Ashnei Knesset Hagadolah, received the oral Torah perfectly from Moses at Sinai all the way through Joshua and the elders and through the prophets, and they had it maintained. Now, because the converts to Christianity were part of an Israelite religion in the first century, the Jews who made this claim wanted to make it like, you're not truly an Israelite, you don't truly possess that identity unless you've had the oral Torah transmitted to you and you know it. So totally convenient to make it like, oh, for all these centuries, we couldn't write down the oral traditions. Oh, but now that there are all these converts to this Israelite form of Christianity, now we need an oral Torah so that we can prove that they're not Israelite. In Deuteronomy chapter 29 and verse 29, we read, "The secret things belong to Yehovah our God, but the things that are revealed belong to us and to our children forever." Not just to the sages. So we don't have secret things just belonging to the sages. We also don't have the things that are revealed just belonging to the sages. It says that we may do all the words of this law. So you learn the Torah by hearing the Torah. And essentially the transmission is you might have somebody in the synagogue just reading the scrolls. And all you're doing is sitting there, listening, taking in the information, and trying to be a faithful member of your community. You know, I often hear from people that if you take something away from someone, you have to replace it with something else. And that's so true. Like, Yehovah takes away our sinful lifestyle, and then he says, here's my Torah, here's my covenant. He replaces it. In Isaiah or Yeshayahu chapter 58 and verse 13, we dispel this idea that you do nothing on Shabbat. A lot of people think they just kick back and do nothing. Folks, that's not what we should be teaching. In Isaiah chapter 58 and verse 13, we read, "If you keep your feet from breaking the Shabbat and from doing as you please on my holy day." So if you're not doing as you please, this implies that you're doing as Yehovah pleases. So you are doing something, you're taking action, but you're taking action on what the Lord wants you to do. If you call the Sabbath a delight and Yehovah's holy day honorable, and if you honor it by not going your way and not doing as you please, or speaking idle words, then you will find your joy in Yehovah. And I will cause you to ride in triumph on the heights of the land, and to feast on the inheritance of your father Yaakov, or Jacob. The mouth of Yehovah has spoken. So do Yehovah's things, and you will find joy in him. You know what's interesting about the Bible? My pastor pointed out this week that there's this rabbinic tradition, and this is true because I verified it, that the altar on Mount Moriah is the place where Ha'adam, or Adam, was created. But this makes sense because in Tanakh we read that Eden was the holy mountain of Elohim, or the holy mountain of God. So in other words, the place where man was supposed to start worshiping Yehovah in spirit and truth is also the place where we'll end up worshiping Yehovah in spirit and truth for eternity as a final destination. So Eden and Mount Moriah are likely the same place, like the exact center of the world. Because Yehovah placed his name geographically there, in my view, so that he could be the center of your world. In other words, Yehovah dispels our self-focus and myopia by virtue of being located in the center of the world. And if I really wanted to have that debate about the Shekinah glory, I believe that it was a manifestation of God himself, that it was a form of his omnipresence, aside from, the Holy Spirit that was given to the prophets and the messengers of that day. And so Yehovah sits atop the firmament. We know this from reading Tanakh. The reason this makes sense is because if you have a biblical cosmological view of the world, then if you sit right on top of the hemisphere, you're at the highest point of it. So he should be at the highest point of everything and at the center of everything. because he's who we worship.